Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. It's no secret, 2 weeks ago, Orleans County was making the news. There was a series of raids on people selling opiates. Today's guest is Orleans County State's Attorney, Jen Barrett. She's here to talk about those raids, but also about the journey to recovery. Welcome to the show.
Scott, thanks for having me.
And you are a frequent flyer on my show.
I am.
I think it's great, though, that you do reach out, because I think it's so important to just educate people at the same time. You know, instead of just throwing people in jail, it's great to educate them.
It's also great for the public to know what we're doing and how we're doing it so they understand the process.
You know, I think it has taken me years. You know, I used to cover court occasionally when I worked for the Chronicle. Then I served in legislature, and then I've had people on my show, and I finally think I have a pretty good idea on the various roles of the judiciary, of law enforcement. And you don't make all the decisions, do you?
No.
Because a lot of people, I think you have more power than you really do.
It's interesting. A lot of people do think that we have exclusive power, but we only make recommendations. Ultimately, all the decisions are up to the judge and the court. And so whether that means what type of bail is recommended or what type of sentence, ultimately it's the decision of the court.
Right. So when you see these, like there was a case, I believe it was Springfield recently, where some people were caught with a sizable amount of heroin, and the town was up in arms when they were released on like $540 bail, and that made big news. That wouldn't, and that you don't know the case probably that well, but that would not have been the state's attorney determining that. That would have been the judge, correct?
Well, it depends, because the state's attorney could have, I don't know the case, recommended a low amount of bail. But ultimately, in the state of Vermont, bail is just how much money is required to assure that the person's going to come back to court. So we don't get to put bail on people, a monetary, like an amount of bail, on people because their offense is serious or that they're dangerous or any of that. It's whether or not we're going to be able to assure their appearance in court. We can hold somebody with no bail if they're violent or if they're a habitual offender, meaning they have 3 prior felonies. But in terms of an amount of bail, it's will this person come to court again? And so the case in Springfield, I've heard a lot about throughout the community forums in the last few weeks, and I honestly don't know what happened with that case. But what I can tell you is I don't know what the state's attorney recommended or what the judge does, but things like that also vary county by county. So state's attorneys are elected by their constituents in their counties, and so different state's attorneys would recommend different amounts of bail, and then different judges do different things across the state as well.
So let's change the topic a little bit, because, a couple weeks ago now, it was big news in Orleans County because everybody was looking around. They were seeing lawmen everywhere. And it was Valentine's Day. They even had helicopters. And for some people, those lawmen were not bringing Valentine gifts they were going to arrest them. So what was going on that day?
Well, since I took office, we've had an alarming number of overdose deaths for such a small county. Mm-hmm. And we've had an alarming number of overdoses that haven't resulted in deaths. We've had a lot of overdoses of people driving and using heroin and overdosing while driving, and it's just been
including with kids in the car.
Including with kids in the car. It's been a really dangerous drug interaction with the public, and so that doesn't go unnoticed. And so the task force has been up here, and they, after seeing all of the overdose deaths and the overdoses and the impact on the community, they started targeting the kingdom.
I think it's great. There's a part of me that truly feels bad for the addicts. I really do. I really hope the best for them, and I feel horrible for the families. But on the other hand, I feel much worse for the family members of the people who have been lost to this addiction too.
Yeah, it's a really terrible, terrible epidemic, and there's been way too many moms that I've met with and family members grieving over the loss of their child due to an overdose, and it's just something has to be done.
Right. You know, we talked about this already before the show. Is I know I've run into a mother, very nice woman. I've known her for years, and she said basically is, you know, with her daughter now in prison, that she's not happy, but it's a sense of relief to know that she's safe, and that maybe now she can get the help she needs. So I've seen a mix. Some people are angry that this raid took place, but there's a lot of other people who are, you know, even the family members see this as maybe an opportunity that their children will not end up in the obituary column. And I think you had a similar experience with a parent who was basically, they probably didn't congratulate you, but they thanked you for saving their son's life.
I can't talk about any individual cases relating to the raid, but I have seen in general that when we're prosecuting some of these cases involving drugs, parents are thankful that their children are being held accountable and having the opportunity for rehab and given at least a chance to change things.
Right. You know, the one thing, as you know, okay, you've been on my show with recovering addicts before. The one thing I find, though, that is interesting is I find the addicts, especially those who are in their journey to recovery, I find them to be much more honest with themselves than their own families are. Like, once they've become clean, they know the person looking in the mirror is the person responsible. But I notice sometimes the family members, they will place blame on everybody else except for their loved one. Well, it was that person that forced my child to do it, or it was that person, or it was the system, or they find blame where, I'm not talking about everybody, but I've even seen some of that on Facebook. It's somebody else's fault. You probably see that too.
Yeah, there's a lot of enabling, and that's really what it is when you blame anything other than the individual for their addiction. Obviously, there are reasons why people are more susceptible to addiction than others. There's people who suffer from a lot of trauma. There's a correlation between trauma in the childhood and addiction later on. All of those things are true and factual, but ultimately, like you said, the people that we see successfully on their journey to recovery are people who take full accountability for their own actions and are honest with themselves and take responsibility for what they've done and take it one day at a time. We've met a lot of really amazing people who are sober right now and doing a great job, but those people are accountable to themselves.
Right. And I think that's one thing is we also need to focus on, and particularly those who are struggling now, is it can be done. Because I've had people on my show, I know people close to me who have done an excellent job in their own journeys. But what role do you? Because you know, there's been a lot of forums. There's been cops. There's been you. There's been different groups. But to me, I think that's all well and fine. But for me, I still think these recovering addicts coming forward and telling their stories, I think is so important because I assume you haven't been a heroin addict, so you can talk existentially about it, but they can tell you what it's like, and they can tell you how low the drug will take them. But do you think their stories really make an impact?
I do. I think the most powerful message is from other people struggling with addiction who are being successful, and I think that hearing that, their peers are able to see that they can do it too. No, I don't have any personal experience with heroin or addiction. And so, yes, I talk about it from a law enforcement or a prosecutorial standpoint. But hearing the message coming from other addicts, I think is the most powerful. I find the message powerful coming from them when I hear it from all different perspectives.
You know, one thing I will tell you, the pet peeve I heard about this, that I have that came out of this raid, when I saw people referring to, these are only kids. Excuse me, these were not kids. They were in their 20s. They were in their 30s. And that's not, that, yes, they are somebody's children. They are somebody's kids, but society, sorry, when you're in your 20s and 30s, I had 3 kids by the time I was 30, and so let's no, they're not children. And I saw people saying, oh, but they're only children and they didn't know what they were doing. No, that doesn't hold any water for me. And besides that is, I think you because you're not, you're right in that ball field, is you probably know a bit, even though you weren't a user, you grew up in their generation. So, I think maybe you have a little more insight than say other law enforcement people might.
Well, I think that goes back to the enabling, blaming someone's age or they didn't know better. There's plenty of people who are in their 20s and 30s who are not heroin addicts and are not selling heroin within the community. So age alone is not an excuse. And I think that using that as an excuse is another scapegoat to shift accountability from the person who's using and selling to the public.
Right. Yeah, because that's the thing is all of us in our lives, some of the best learning experiences I've ever had was when I have fallen flat on my face and done something incredibly dumb. Now, I usually do that every day, something, no matter how big or small, but I learned from it. And that's how come when my people come on my show who are in recovery, I'm just like wowed by them that they're willing to come forward and share their stories, because they don't have to do that. They're not, if you made them come on my show as in part of sentencing, that wouldn't wow me so much. But when they come forward, they're coming forward, like to tell the world is, hey, this is who we were, and I have to believe that most of them truly want to make this crisis a little bit better.
I agree. I think that they do. There was a couple of people in recovery who were on one of the panels that I was on recently, and I thought that their courage to get up in front of an auditorium full of people and talk about their journey to recovery and being addicts and how low that had gotten them and their experiences, and some of them with their experiences with the court, I thought it was amazing. And I think it's a great message to send to the community and a great story for people to hear, especially people who are struggling right now and don't really see a way out.
And you haven't been around here that many years, but I've been here all my life, and now I know people who were addicts years ago. And there are some, and they don't come forward, and that I respect that. Because you got to do what you got to do. There are people who are now, I guess you'd still call it recovering addicts, who are doing amazing things. They're actually some leaders in our community who know how it feels to be where this current group of heroin addicts are. So, even though I'm really impressed with a person for coming forward to share their stories, I also respect those who decide that's not for them.
Right, it's certainly a personal decision what to share about your own experience, and for some people it may not help their recovery to talk in public about what they're going through.
So, how did this raid all, the part that you can talk about, how does a raid actually take shape to this magnitude? It must be multiple law enforcement components working together.
Yeah, certainly. So, in general, in cases and investigations like this, people who are targeted are people who are selling above their addiction. And so what that means is the people who are targeted are people who have been identified as selling for profit versus selling to feed their addiction. So in general, that's the type of people who these investigations target. And so once they start hearing names of people who are selling and selling for a profit, they start trying to figure out, where people lie in the scheme of the chart of accountability, I guess. And then they use informants and other techniques to buy from those individuals. And then once a purchase is made, they set it aside. But so it's more effective, and you get a better understanding of all of the people involved, and you have a better and more successful rate if you do this over a long period of time. So what the public will see is some of the sales are from a year ago or more, and some of them are very recent, and that's because they really are trying to figure out everybody's roles before they do the sweep.
Right.
Because if people were being arrested regularly, people would figure out really quickly what was going on, whereas if there's a long investigation, it's easier to target a number of individuals.
Yeah, you've even, if you recall, even on my show, where I've had people in recovery, even though they're so happy they recovered and they want people to recover, those stings where they send people in for buys, especially if they've been used by, especially if it's a fellow user or a former person they dealt with, that still gets on their nerves about there's some people who don't feel it's fair to set up, to do it the way they actually do it by basically, well, do you give, like, for example, whether you can disclose this or not, if you catch somebody, or if the police do, with a certain amount of heroin, can they barter down their sentences or get it expunged altogether if they go in and serve as an informant?
It depends. It's possible. It depends on the person's history, their criminal record, that offense that they've committed, how serious it is, what they can contribute in terms of information or working.
That seems like an awful dangerous thing to do, though. I think I'd rather sit in jail a couple of years. Are they going to figure out who these people are? Like can the dealers figure out who ratted them out?
It's possible.
Yeah, 'cause that seems like that seems like a tough decision to make.
I think it is.
Right. So what long-term impact do you think a raid such as this has on a community?
I think the biggest part of the sweep is awareness to the public. So I don't think that the sweep really dented the dealers in our community. I don't think it dented the amount of heroin that was on the street that very night. I don't think that it's going to entirely stop the problem. But what it does do is it again brings public awareness to the problem, right? There's a big sort of exciting aspect to helicopters and police agencies and 30 arrests. That's something that the entire public took notice of. And so it brings awareness to the problem. And so people want to be involved, business owners want to be involved, people are more aware of what's going on around them. So we're hoping that it brings awareness, that people continue to talk to us about who's selling and who's using and that type of information so that we can continue to combat the problem.
One thing people don't understand, and I've actually run into this even since the raid, is they don't I think you understand where I'm coming from, is they don't understand the difference of knowing somebody's dealing and proving somebody's dealing. There's just because you know somebody's dealing, you probably can't go to the judge and say, hey, I want to search, we need a search warrant. So can you show me the evidence? Well, no, because I just know it. And do you know what I'm saying?
Right. We would never turn away information. So if people, quote, know somebody's dealing, that's helpful for us to know, because maybe it isn't someone that we've connected into things. But you're right. So in order to do a search or to arrest somebody, we have to have what's called probable cause. And what that means is we have to be able to prove by 51% to get a search warrant or to make an arrest. And so knowledge alone is not 51%.
Right.
And so we need to have actual evidence. But we are always interested in hearing from people about what role individuals are playing, just so we're aware of sort of the scheme of things.
Now, to me, as a fairly sane person, with all this education, with all this going on in the news, you know, you have to be pretty numb to the fact that the dangers of opiates now. I understand, you know, maybe a few years ago, it's kind of like smoking. I understand World War II generation, even the Vietnam generation, maybe to a degree my generation not understanding the dangers of cigarettes. Well, now I believe you have to begin smoking now, you have to be a special kind of stupid. You know, I don't mean the people who are addicted to it, but so is there new people beginning to use opiates even in spite of what they see is going on?
The pattern that we see is that people started with pills and that the pills escalate to the heroin, and that's sort of what we're seeing over and over and over again as a theme about why people use. But I don't pretend to know how somebody gets into those.
But do you think is there an end in sight? Because as I said, with smoking now, we know what it does. And I don't begrudge the people who are truly addicted to it from before. I don't. But if I were a person, when it comes to opiates, I'd be, you know, you have to be pretty blind to the fact of the dangers now. I'm just wondering if there's now a move away from these opiates for I don't mean the already addicted people, but are there less people who are experimenting with them? Any thoughts?
I have no idea, but one of the things that I always find interesting is the sort of doctor accountability or aspect to people becoming addicted. So it depends on what doctor you go to, right? So I had a surgery in the last year, and I was given a supply and a refill of OxyContin. And I personally didn't want them, wanted no part of them, took maybe one or two the first few days and didn't use the rest, disposed of them all, wouldn't take them.
I was going to say, I hope you didn't sell them.
Did not sell them, you know, got rid of them all, right? But when doctors are prescribing 30 or 60 pills, and people are, well, they're prescribed by the doctor, taking them, and I think it sort of gets to the point where people, I can see how, when you have 60 pain pills, how you could sort of be enticed into taking them, right? And then I think that once people are sort of addicted to the feeling from the pills, and then it's an easy slide into heroin.
You know, I often wonder how much that whole doctor thing is overrated, though, about, well, I got addicted to it because of I broke my leg or whatever. Now, I do know a story where the person sincerely did, and I know this for a fact. She got addicted through breaking her ankle, and but here again, she blames nobody but herself, and she had 2 years of hell, and now she's a quiet Pied Piper of the evils of, you know, overprescribing. But I have friends who are doctors. I don't think that's an issue here anymore about overprescribing. I think now it's really tough to get opiates. And here's the problem lies. Then you get people who truly need opiates because of serious problems. They're also now, on the flip side, feeling like they have to jump through every hoop so they can get what they need. Yeah,
I think there's doctors on both extremes, and I don't know the actual statistics of how many people were actually became addicted because of a surgery or something like that. I just know that's what we hear a lot, and so I don't know the truth behind that. I just thought it was interesting because when I had a surgery this last year, I was given a fairly large supply of pain pills, and didn't feel like there was any warning about the possible addiction.
Oh, sure.
There wasn't any gauge on well, take a week of these, and if you need more, come back, we'll reassess your pain. It just seemed like a lot of pills to be given.
100%. And I agree with you, because you know my daughter. She broke her ankle, and no, she wasn't the one who got addicted, because she's, no, that wasn't, because she wouldn't take pain pills. But what really surprised me, when she broke her ankle, I was right there, and when she came out of surgery and everything and left, it really was a lackadaisical reaction. It's like, did they ever talk to you? She knows the dangers of them. That's not because she didn't want anything to do with them. But I was really surprised that particular doctor never gave her a warning. Like, hey, by the way, these are really good things for short-term pain, but they can create real havoc in your life. And I guess you're right.
And I think that there's some doctors who are exactly the opposite. I know a friend who just had a surgery within the last few weeks, and she really felt like she was put through the stringer with all these acknowledgments in advance about the potential addiction, and she had to do surveys about whether anybody in her extended family had ever been an addict, and she just felt like she had to jump through a number of hoops to even get medications after a surgery. And I had sort of an opposite experience, and both of us went to different hospitals, neither of which are in Orleans County, but I just felt our experiences were really different. I think that sort of displays how different doctors really do things entirely differently.
Like a friend of mine, Dr. Les Lockridge, he was telling me they have they have all their guidelines in writing now, and usually what addicts will do is, one of the first things they'll do, he's not a new doctor, but especially when a new doctor comes to the area, they focus right on them like laser beams to find out what these doctors are about in their prescribing patterns, and so you have to be concrete. The doctors have to be concrete in their, have that, be prepared for that.
Yeah, and I think that federally, on the state level, there has been a lot of really good work in terms of limiting how doctors prescribe and sort of making it a more watchful eye looking at the way doctors prescribe. Right. And so I think that has helped a lot in the last few years.
Right. Okay, one more topic before we go in a couple minutes here is the one thing that I think really shocked the state was the closure of Maple Leaf. Now, I know you're not probably really privy to that whole thing, but probably not, other than the politics involved of it closing, is from being a state's attorney who is very concerned, because I know you are concerned about the addicts as well. You're not just, you don't want to see them spend the rest of their lives in addiction or in jail. It seems like we really need to have more ways to help these addicts.
We do. We really are lacking resources. We're lacking resources in the kingdom. We're really lacking resources statewide. There's not enough beds in the residential rehabs. There's long waits, which is a significant problem, because if somebody hits their rock bottom and they want to get help, there should be a bed available, because that person may not want help in 60 days when there's a bed available, or it may be too late. Right. And so that's been a big problem. There are some good resources in the kingdom, but there's just not enough.
In closing, I'll say this, is I do think all this talk, whether it's you or in the raids, but the talk is actually starting to help out a little bit. I can go to a grocery store now, and I can actually have a person come up to me and tell me that they're using heroin, and they'll come up and tell me, and they said that these stories actually give them hope, and they hope they can be can find it within them to be as strong as these stories that are getting out there, because whether they made poor decisions to get to where they are, I don't think there's many addicts who, once they're there, I don't think they like the world they're in. They might like it during the high, But yeah, I've had people come up to me and just talk to me about their addiction, and I think all these stories, whether it's me doing them, whether these other groups, whether it's you handling it from the law aspect, I still think we're all helping in our tiny little way, and it's not going to be solved overnight. And you know what? It probably won't ever be solved, but I think you can at least put a dent in it.
I agree. I think that everybody talking about it is taking the right steps, and awareness is a good start. It's not going to solve the problem, but I think it's a step in the right direction.
And I do think we live in la la land. Most of us do. As you know, I'm famous for saying I go around with rose-colored glasses, but the thing is, it's like last week, my guest on the show was the new Border Patrol commander is Steve Hennessy, and as he even says, we live in this great place, and relatively crime-free compared to other parts. But we have such a great place. Sometimes we don't see some of the darkness as well that is lurking there. So I think what you're doing, I think what everybody's doing is starting to get some legs to it.
I agree. Thanks, Scott.
And I really, I can't say enough, I think you're doing a great job as state's attorney. You are so, when you're up there, you're not afraid to answer questions, you answer them precisely, and you seem so unflappable when you're doing it. But I also don't sense that you're vengeful. You have a job to do, but I don't think you hate these people, these addicts.
Oh, absolutely not. I would want nothing more than to never see them in front of me ever again, and that's really the goal. And it's about getting people help, and I know we don't have a lot of time left, but we just started a program actually that's geared at low-level misdemeanors to divert them from the criminal justice system and get them into a treatment-based program with a pretrial monitor and avoid the criminal justice system altogether. And we're doing that with only low-level misdemeanors, but our goal is really to get people treatment. I mean, there's certainly some people who jail is appropriate for, but your average addict, jail is not it. And we want them to get treatment, and we want them not to commit crimes in the community. We want them to not ever see me in that arena ever again.
Right. Okay. As always, I'm going to be inviting you back on because I think this is an important part of your job, because I think it's great for people to see the face of the state's attorney, and just to know what the legal system is doing, because we can throw rocks at you guys all we want. We can throw rocks at the judges, but that isn't going to get us anywhere.
I think knowledge is power.
Right. Okay. Thanks
Scott.
for coming on. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.